The dead click of the ignition was a death knell. Rain lashed against the windshield, mirroring the tears Janet couldn't shed. Her old Volvo, the Veteran, was more than just a car. It was their last lifeline, now a cold metal coffin. Beside her, 8-year-old Leo's small, questioning voice cut through the silence. "Is the Veteran sleepy, Mom?" This devastating moment, under a sky the color of a fresh bruise, had been building for months. The cough had been new, a sickly, sputtering gasp that made the whole frame of the car shudder. It wasn't the familiar, reassuring grumble of the old engine, but something far more sinister. Janet's breath would catch in her throat, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the steering wheel. Beside her, Leo was usually too engrossed in a comic book to notice, his small world blissfully insulated from the cold knot of dread that now lived permanently in his mother's stomach. The car, a 1993 Volvo 240 wagon they called the Veteran, was more than just a vehicle. At 34, Janet felt like its weary counterpart. Laid off from her administrative job 6 months ago, her life had become a tightrope walk of managing dwindling savings and maintaining a brave face for Leo. The Veteran was her inheritance, a steel-and-glass time capsule from her father, the man who had taught her the difference between a socket wrench and a torque wrench, who had filled her childhood with the smell of motor oil and the satisfying click of a well-seated bearing. Now it was her only significant asset, her lifeline. It got Leo to school, it took her to fruitless job interviews, and it carried them to the one place that offered a semblance of peace, the Northwood Community Library. She volunteered there 3 days a week. It was an unpaid position, a fact that gnawed at her pride, but the library was a sanctuary of silence and order in her chaotic life. It gave Leo a safe, warm place to do his homework after school, surrounded by stories that could take him anywhere. For Janet, it was a place to feel useful, to escape the four walls of their small apartment and the constant, humming anxiety of her unemployment. But every turn of the key in the Veteran's ignition was a prayer. The car wasn't a hobby, it was survival. It was her legs, her freedom, her one tangible link to a life before making do became her daily mantra. As she pulled into a parking spot behind the library, the engine would settle into a rough, uneven idle. The cough was gone for now, but the fear it left behind lingered like the faint scent of unburnt fuel. Carl, the head librarian, had been observing Janet for weeks. At 58, he was a man who moved with the quiet deliberation of someone who has spent a lifetime among books. He possessed an almost preternatural awareness of the subtle currents of human activity that flowed through his domain. He saw the worn-out soles of Janet's shoes, the careful way she portioned out Leo's afternoon snack, and the faint, persistent tremor in her hands when she thought no one was looking. But what truly captured his attention was not her hardship, but her focus. Unlike other patrons in similar straits who gravitated towards the career and self-help sections, Janet's territory was the forgotten corner of the nonfiction stacks. She sought out dusty, out-of-print automotive repair manuals, her fingers tracing the faded diagrams with a reverence that puzzled him. She would check out thick, heavy tomes, Bosch fuel injection and engine management, the European Automotive Yearbook, 1995 books that hadn't been touched in years. He'd once found a stray notebook she'd left behind on a table. Curiosity piqued, he'd glanced inside, expecting grocery lists or budget calculations. Instead, he found pages filled with meticulously hand-drawn schematics. They were beautiful in their precision, exploded views of a fuel pump assembly, a detailed rendering of a differential gear set. The notes in the margins were written in a neat, confident hand, filled with technical specifications and diagnostic observations. One afternoon, he overheard her talking to Leo, her voice soft but imbued with an unmistakable authority. Leo had pointed to a diagram in one of her books. "What's that swirly thing, Mom?" he'd asked. Janet, without a hint of condescension, had launched into a clear, concise explanation of how a turbocharger worked, using the analogy of a pinwheel and a hairdryer. Carl had stood unseen behind a bookshelf, utterly captivated. It wasn't just knowledge. It was a deep, ingrained passion, a fluency in a language of mechanics that shone brightly against the drab backdrop of her apparent struggles. Meanwhile, Janet's evenings were a frantic ballet of online searches. Seated at her small kitchen table, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating her worried face, she hunted for a specific, elusive part, a fuel pump relay for a '93 Volvo 240. The forums were a minefield of conflicting advice. The parts available on eBay were either suspiciously cheap, shipped from halfway across the world with no guarantee, or priced at a level that would mean foregoing groceries for a week. Each dead end, each overpriced listing, tightened the knot of anxiety in her chest. The veteran's cough was becoming more frequent, a persistent harbinger of a disaster she felt powerless to prevent. Back in the grocery store parking lot, after the final, dead click, Janet got out. The cold, relentless rain was falling, turning the world outside into a smear of gray and neon. With a week's worth of meager provisions in the back, her hands, though trembling with a surge of adrenaline, moved with practiced desperation. She checked the battery terminals, clean and tight. She ran a hand along the fuel lines, feeling for pressure. She even tapped the mass airflow sensor, a trick her dad had taught her. But she was just delaying the inevitable, avoiding the one component she feared most. Finally, her fingers found the small, black box tucked away near the firewall, the fuel pump relay. It was hot, unnaturally hot, and a faint, acrid smell of burnt plastic stung her nostrils. It was the smell of defeat. This wasn't a roadside fix. This was the end of the line. The cost of a tow truck alone was a figure she couldn't comprehend, let alone the price of a new relay and the labor to install it. Defeated, she slammed the hood shut. The sound was swallowed by the downpour. A sob caught in her throat, hot and painful. She had to hold it together. For Leo. Tears mixed with the rain on her cheeks as she buckled a now whimpering Leo back into his car seat, a useless throne in a dead metal box. She grabbed the heaviest grocery bags, her arms straining, and began the long, humiliating walk home. Each step was a testament to her failure. Cars sped past, sending arcs of filthy water splashing against her legs. People stared from their dry, moving capsules of warmth and normality. The plastic bags cut into her fingers, the milk and eggs feeling like lead weights. But the heaviest burden was the sight of her son, trudging miserably beside her, his small hand clutching hers, his face a mask of confusion and fear. It wasn't just a car she had lost in that parking lot. It was the final buffer between her and complete, overwhelming despair. The next morning, the apartment felt suffocatingly quiet without the familiar pre-dawn routine of getting the veteran ready. Janet stared at the phone, the receiver feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. She had to call the library. The thought of explaining her situation, of admitting her life had ground to a halt over a single, small, plastic component, filled her with a profound sense of shame. Finally, she dialed. When Carl's calm, steady voice answered, her own was barely a whisper, hoarse with suppressed emotion. "Carl, it's Janet. I can't make it in today. My car, it's broken down for good this time." That simple, defeated statement was the catalyst. For Carl, it wasn't just an employee calling in. It was a distress signal. His mind immediately flashed to the images from her notebook, the intricate, loving drawings of engine parts. He saw the passion, the expertise, the hidden talent that was now being suffocated by a common, cruel twist of fate. He murmured words of sympathy, told her not to worry about her shift, but as he hung up, a plan was already taking shape. It was a long shot, a connection forged by chance. Just last Sunday, at a tedious family dinner, his brother-in-law, Arthur, had been complaining. Arthur sat on the board of the Great Lakes Automotive Heritage Museum, a local institution dedicated to preserving automotive history. "We've got a problem in the restoration workshop," Arthur had grumbled over his roast beef. "We have mechanics who can turn a wrench, and we have kids fresh out of tech school who only know what a computer tells them. What we don't have is someone with the feel for it. Someone who can look at a box of unlabeled parts from a 1988 Saab 900 and just know, what each piece is and where it goes. The words echoed in Carl's mind with sudden, startling clarity. He looked at the phone, then at the reference desk where Janet usually sat, a quiet beacon of competence. He thought of her explaining a turbocharger to her son. This wasn't just about a broken-down car. It was about a misplaced talent. Without a moment's hesitation, he picked up the phone again, his fingers dialing Arthur's number. He didn't mention Janet's poverty or her desperation. He didn't frame it as a charity case. He framed it as a solution. "Arthur," he began, his voice firm with conviction, "I think I've found the person you're looking for. I know a woman with an encyclopedic, almost intuitive, knowledge of vintage European cars." An hour later, Janet's phone rang, startling her. She was sitting at her kitchen table, staring blankly at a pile of bills she couldn't pay, the silence of the apartment amplifying the roar of her own anxieties. Seeing the library's number on the caller ID, she assumed Carl was calling to check on her, and a fresh wave of embarrassment washed over her. She almost didn't answer, her hand hovering over the phone, before a sense of duty made her press the button. "Janet, it's Carl again," he said. His tone was different this time, not just sympathetic, but charged with a quiet, purposeful energy. "I hope you don't mind, and please, feel free to say no, but I took a bit of a liberty after we spoke." This might sound a little out of the blue. Janet braced herself. She imagined the offer that was coming: a small loan from a staff collection fund, a list of social services she'd already exhausted, a well-meaning but ultimately painful act of charity. She prepared her gracious, hollow refusal. But what came next sent a jolt through her system, a shock so profound it felt like an electric current. "I was speaking with a contact of mine at the Great Lakes Automotive Heritage Museum," Carl continued, his words measured and respectful. "It was a pure coincidence, but it turns out they have a very specific and immediate need. They're looking for a part-time restoration assistant. The role, as it was described to me, requires someone with a deep, practical understanding of European models from the 80s and 90s. Someone who knows them inside and out, beyond what the manuals say. When you told me about your Volvo, and frankly, Janet, having seen the incredible detail in your notebooks and the way you talk about these machines, I couldn't help but think of you." Their head curator, a woman named Alina Vance, was intrigued by what I described. "She'd like to talk to you." Silence stretched over the line, thick and absolute. Janet's mind struggled to catch up, to process the cascade of unbelievable words. The museum, a curator, intrigued by her. It was so far outside the realm of possibility that for a moment she thought she was hallucinating, that the stress had finally cracked her grip on reality. This wasn't pity. This wasn't a handout. This was validation. It was recognition. Carl hadn't seen a desperate single mom defined by her problems. He had seen a knowledgeable expert defined by her talent. He hadn't offered to fix her immediate, broken-down car. He had offered her a path to fix her entire life, a path paved with her own forgotten passion. The knot of despair that had been lodged in her chest for months, cold and heavy as lead, began to loosen. It was replaced by a dizzying, terrifying, brilliant surge of hope. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the stack of red-stamped envelopes on the table. But these were not the hot, shameful tears of yesterday's rain-soaked walk. They were tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude, of a pressure valve being released after years of being tightened. "Carl," she finally managed to say, her voice cracking, breaking on the single word. I don't know what to say." "Just say you'll talk to her, Janet," he said gently, his voice a calm anchor in her emotional storm. "Your knowledge is a rare and valuable thing. It deserves to be in a place where it's celebrated." In that moment, Carl's phone call became more than a job lead. It was a lifeline thrown not to her sinking ship, but to her drowning spirit. It was a powerful beam of light, piercing through the dense fog of her hopelessness and illuminating a future she hadn't dared to imagine for herself, let alone for Leo. Taking a bus to the interview felt like a journey to another planet. The Great Lakes Automotive Heritage Museum was an imposing brick building, a former engine factory repurposed to house gleaming monuments of steel and chrome. Walking through the public exhibit hall to get to the offices, Janet felt a sense of awe mixed with acute imposter syndrome. She, in her one decent blazer bought years ago from a thrift store, was about to talk to people who curated these legends, these pristine Jaguars, immaculate Porsches, and flawless Mercedes-Benzes. Alina Vance was not what Janet had expected. She was a woman in her late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes, grease under her fingernails, and a no-nonsense demeanor that was surprisingly comforting. She led Janet past the polished exhibits into the heart of the museum, the restoration workshop. The air here was different. It smelled real. It was a heady, familiar perfume of motor oil, metal dust, and old leather. The workshop was a cathedral of controlled chaos, filled with cars in various states of disassembly, their inner workings exposed like anatomical models. The interview was less a series of questions and more a practical examination. Alina led her to a workbench cluttered with the components of a dismantled fuel injection system. From a 1986 Mercedes 190E, Alina stated, watching Janet's face. The apprentice we had couldn't make sense of it. What are we looking at? All of Janet's nervousness evaporated, replaced by the pure, instinctual focus she felt when working on the veteran. Her fingers hovered over the parts. It's a Bosch Keijetronic system, she said, her voice steady and clear. This is the fuel distributor, and that wear pattern on the plunger suggests it's been running lean. The electrohydraulic actuator here, it looks clean, but you should always test the coil resistance. They're notorious for failing intermittently before they die completely. She spoke with a quiet confidence, the language of mechanics flowing from her effortlessly. Alina's expression remained neutral, but a flicker of deep appreciation showed in her eyes. She pointed to a stripped-down engine block on a stand nearby. And that, Janet's gaze softened, a B230F inline-4, single overhead cam. The heart of my own car, actually. They're practically indestructible if you treat them right. That was the moment. Alina smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed her face. The job is yours if you want it, Janet. Part-time to start. We need someone who speaks the language, not just reads the manual. A few weeks later, a small, square box containing a brand-new, German-made fuel pump relay arrived at her apartment. It was the first significant purchase she'd made with her own, new paycheck. On a bright, sunny Saturday afternoon, with Leo acting as her dutiful assistant, handing her tools, she opened the hood of the veteran. There was no desperation this time, only a calm, joyful sense of purpose. She clipped the old relay out and seated the new one with a satisfying click. She slid into the driver's seat, took a deep breath, and turned the key. The engine turned over instantly, catching with a smooth, powerful roar that vibrated through the entire car. It was the healthiest sound in the world. Leo cheered from the passenger seat. As the engine settled into a steady, perfect idle, Janet rested her forehead against the steering wheel, a single, happy tear tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't just the sound of an engine. It was the sound of her own life, starting again. Months later, Janet had become an indispensable part of the museum's workshop. Her quiet confidence had blossomed, and her encyclopedic knowledge, once a private hobby, was now a celebrated asset. One crisp autumn afternoon, she took Leo to the Northwood Community Library. In her hands, she carried a heavy, spiral-bound book. She found Carl reshelving books in the history section. "Carl," she said, her smile genuine and relaxed, "we wanted to bring you something." She handed him the book. It was a pristine, original print 1993 Volvo 240 factory service manual, a rare find she'd sourced through the museum's network. For the library's collection, in case another enthusiast comes looking. Carl took the manual, his fingers tracing the embossed title. He looked from the book to Janet's face, seeing the new light in her eyes. My father was a watchmaker, he said softly, the admission surprising even himself. He could spend hours on a single tiny gear. He had that same focus I saw in you, that same love for a well-made machine. In this digital age, I was afraid that kind of passion was disappearing. He looked at Janet, then at a beaming Leo. Thank you for showing me it hasn't. In that quiet moment, among the stories of the past, their own story found its perfect ending. The help Carl had offered wasn't a one-way street. In giving Janet a chance, he had reaffirmed his own belief in the enduring value of human skill and passion, healing a small, quiet grief he hadn't even realized he was carrying. The kindness had come full circle, illuminating them both.